Doris Kearns Goodwin is a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and biographer of several U.S. presidents. In Leadership in Turbulent Times, she turns her attention to 4 American leaders who faced some of the most difficult challenges in our nation's history: Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and Lyndon B. Johnson. Goodwin begins with a look at Lincoln's leadership during the Civil War. Lincoln faced many challenges, both military and political, but he was able to keep the nation together and ultimately win the war. He also helped to end slavery, which was a very controversial issue at the time. Theodore Roosevelt was the next leader profiled by Goodwin. Roosevelt became president after the assassination of William McKinley. He was a very energetic president, and he accomplished a lot during his time in office. He helped to build the Panama Canal. He increased American involvement in world affairs, and he also worked to improve the economy. Franklin D. Roosevelt was the next president profiled by Goodwin. Roosevelt was faced with the challenge of leading the nation through the Great Depression and World War II. He was very successful in both endeavors. He helped to get the economy back on track, and he also led the Allies to victory in World War II. Lyndon B. Johnson was the last president profiled by Goodwin. Johnson became president after the assassination of John F. Kennedy. He faced many challenges during his time in office, including the Vietnam War. Despite these challenges, he was able to accomplish a lot. He passed several important pieces of legislation, including the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Goodwin's book is a well-written and insightful look at the lives of 4 very different presidents. Each man faced unique challenges, but they all shared a common goal: to make America a better place. Goodwin's book is an excellent resource for anyone interested in American history or presidential leadership. Part 1. Part-I Ambition and the Recognition of Leadership. I must die or be better. Lincoln. What fired in Lincoln this furious and fertile time of self-improvement? The answer lay in his readiness to gaze in the mirror and soberly scrutinize himself. Taking stock, he found himself wanting. From the beginning, young Lincoln aspired to nothing less than to inscribe his name into the book of communal memory, to fulfill what he believed to be his destiny. A different kind of sustained effort and discipline was required, a willingness to confront weakness and imperfection, reflect upon failure, and examine the kind of leader he wanted to be. The diligence and studiousness he exhibited during this period of introspection would have been remarkable in a young student. In a man of 40, it was astounding. A man watches his pear tree day after day, impatient for the ripening of the fruit. Let him attempt to force the process, and he may spoil both fruit and tree. But let him patiently wait, and the ripe pear at length falls into his lap. Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln's growth mindset. While uncertain about his prospects in this first election, Lincoln made it clear that failure did not intimidate him. Should he lose, he had said when declaring his intention to run, he had been too familiar with disappointments to be very much chagrined, and yet he forewarned. Only after being defeated some 5 or 6 times would he deem it a disgrace, and be certain never to try it again. So, along with the uncertainty of whether his ambition would be realized, was the promise of resilience. Part 2. Adversity and Growth. In moments of crisis, we reveal our true selves. Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was faced with many challenges during his time as president. He was able to overcome these challenges and become a better leader as a result. One of the biggest challenges he faced was the Panama Canal project. The canal was plagued with problems from the start. There were cost overruns, delays, and political opposition. Roosevelt was able to overcome these obstacles and get the canal built. He also increased American involvement in world affairs and worked to improve the economy, acquiring virtue. Roosevelt maintained that empathy, like courage, could be acquired over time. A man who conscientiously endeavors to throw in his lot with those about him, to make his interest theirs, to put himself in a position where he and they have a common object, will at first feel a little self-conscious, will realize too plainly his ends, but with exercise this will pass off. He will speedily find that the fellow feeling which at first he had to stimulate was really existent, though latent, and is capable of a very healthy growth. Indeed, he argued that a very large part of the rancor of political and social strife springs from the fact that different classes or sections are so cut off from each other that neither appreciates the other's passions, prejudices, and, indeed, point of view. By his 3rd term in the Assembly, Roosevelt had begun to soften his abrasive self-righteousness, working with Democrats whom he had previously labeled as rotten. He brought the two parties together to pass civil service reform and a host of bills to benefit the city of New York. He had taken his weaknesses, his physical liabilities, his fears, and the brash and self-centered aspects of his leadership style, and had carefully worked to overcome them. Part 3: The Leader and the Times, How They Led. Their leadership had teaches us several lessons that are still relevant today. One of the most important lessons is that leaders need to be adaptable. They need to be able to adjust their leadership style to fit the needs of the situation. Leaders also need to be aware of the changing times and be able to adapt their policies and actions accordingly. One example of this is how President Franklin Roosevelt dealt with the Great Depression. He was faced with an unprecedented economic crisis. He implemented a series of policies known as the New Deal to help improve the economy. These policies were controversial at the time, but they were eventually successful in getting the economy back on track. Another example is how President John F. Kennedy dealt with the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was faced with a potential nuclear war. He was able to defuse the crisis through diplomacy and by making some tough decisions. These examples show that leaders need to be adaptable to changing circumstances. They also need to be willing to take risks and make tough decisions. Leaders today can learn from these examples and apply these lessons to their own lives.